I'm Al Roxburgh. I'll let Martin introduce himself. We are both part of the team that edits and brings the Journal of Missional Practice together, along with Sarah Jane Walker and Mary Publicover. And this morning we want to host a conversation entitled From Exile to Earthquake. Interesting conversation. But Martin, you may want to introduce yourself a little bit.
Yeah, I'm principal of Mission College, which operates mainly in the United Kingdom, a little bit in various parts of the continent of Europe. So we have numerous students, just under 200 students in various campuses around the country, which we hope will result in more people taking part in church planting and missional congregations around the UK. So that's my main occupation, but part of the conversation that I'm having with Al centers around the Journal for Missional Practice, which is hosting this conversation today.
And part of our conversation today is really around a large question which the journal in its latest issue is beginning to address, called What's Next? And it's an issue which is not only about the larger culture, but also what's happening to us as churches, as leaders, as congregations, as simply neighbors, as we live in the midst of this COVID-19 crisis. We're beginning to ask, what's next? What happens when we come out of the quarantine, and what does it mean for leaders, and how as church leaders do we see this? So that's the context of the conversation. Anything you want to add to that, Martin?
Yeah, well, let's just dive straight in, because you and I wrote a book just over a year ago. And one of the things that we were wrestling with is this issue of what are the metaphors that we use for understanding our present situation. That's heightened a little bit by the COVID-19 context. And I wonder if you'd just like to take a minute to recount some of the metaphors that are used to try and understand the situation of the church in mission in the Western world.
Yeah, I would love to do that. As we listen to people, particularly leaders, a series of metaphors keep coming up to describe our situation. So one of the primary metaphors is exile. This sense that as Christians in the West, we are living now in a state of exile. Another metaphor, which is connected to that, is that we are also in a marginal place, that over against the rest of culture, Christians are somehow marginalized. Or a third kind of metaphor that's used is we are minority. And you'll see that all of these are metaphors of emotion and displacement, and they're metaphors in which there's a sense of being over against. So these are the dominant metaphors expressing both how we see ourselves, how we see our location in the world, how we see other people, in fact, and how we understand our roles. So those are the dominant metaphors that we're using right now.
And why do you think metaphor is so important in terms of shaping imagination?
Yeah, metaphors really describe how we see and understand ourselves and how we see the world in which we live. And what metaphors do is not only shape the way we see our world and ourselves, but they shape our emotional frame and responses to ourselves and the world. So metaphors are pretty powerful things. They're going to determine whether we are conscious of this or not. They're going to determine how we act. If I see myself as a participant with others in a community, in a neighborhood, I'm going to see myself in that neighborhood community very differently than if I come with the context, I'm in exile. So metaphors are very important.
Yep. So when we were writing the book, we kind of toyed with this metaphor of exile for a while, and we we felt a bit uncomfortable about it. Would you want to say a little bit more about why we found that a difficult metaphor to work with?
Yeah. I mean, it's been used for quite a while, and it's been used to create ways of understanding how to behave in late modern societies. But the problem I have with metaphors like exile is that when I sit down with church leaders in coffee shops or in restaurants, it sure doesn't look like exile to me. It looks like we are doing very well inside our societies and our cultures. And when I go and sit with someone these days on a park bench and talk about Christian life, the person opposite me may not be Christian, but they're not antagonistic. They're actually interested. So exile metaphor to me just simply doesn't fit the reality on the ground. And for me, exile carries the notion, and you may want to say more about this one, it carries the notion that we've been taken away, that something's been removed from us. I don't know about you. I don't experience that. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, we're not exactly outside of our context, are we, in the way that the
No.
people of Israel were? And in that sense, one of the things that we were also talking about the other day was a completely different metaphor, and I'm just going to describe it briefly. We were playing a little bit with the idea of the Macedonian call, which I like because it's Paul's first encounter with European culture, the mainland of Europe. And here he is, he arrives in a missionary setting, and he's looking for a certain outcome. He's looking possibly to discover who is this man from Macedonia that's issued the call. And as far as we know, he never actually finds the Macedonian man, but rather what happens is that he experiences a set of completely unfamiliar circumstances. So in other words, the methodology that is used previously, visiting the synagogue, going from there, a kind of known script, is completely unavailable to him, because in this unfamiliar setting, in this unfamiliar surroundings, there is no synagogue, and consequently, what he has to do is reimagine the situation. And what happens is some completely unexpected encounters. And the first of those is, of course, the encounter with Lydia. So women, not men, is the first of those encounters. And then the second encounter is what happens in the prison where there's an earthquake. And that's why we chose this image, in a sense, not exile so much as earthquake. And the earthquake impacts not only Paul and his party pretty directly, but it impacts the whole society. And there's a sense in which maybe what we're living in is not so much exile, but earthquake. The whole of society, in a sense, is being shaken at the moment. And we are not spectators, we're participants in that. And we're trying to live out together with those with whom we share in society, to try and understand what on earth is going on, and not only what on earth is going on, but how do we live as a new community, a Christian community, in this setting in a way that brings meaning and hope and light and life to those that we share with, rather than simply trying to convey a set message to.
Yeah, that metaphor appeals to me a great deal. And certainly, as I say, exile just simply makes no sense in the context in which we find ourselves, and we're not at war. But I remember numbers of years ago being actually in an earthquake, and it was a 6.9 earthquake that killed 50 people. And I remember when the earthquake hit early in the morning, I was much younger, and the bravado I had of, oh, what was that, right? And going off to college and coming back. But I'll never forget that evening. I went to my desk and I sat down at my desk, and there was still aftershocks. But the real thing was sitting at my desk with my feet on the carpet, I could feel the earth shaking like jelly. And I mean, I had to get up and walk away. I couldn't just sit there. And I think all of us, Christians, non-Christians, we're all in this together. And what earthquake invites, which is what I experienced at that time, was that we become blessings and guests for one another. And we learn from one another and we engage with one another. That's a whole different space than being marginal or being at war or being in exile.
So I guess if that is a useful metaphor, what it's saying to us is, look, this is unfamiliar territory. It's unfamiliar to those of us who are Christians, but it's also unfamiliar to those who we seek to share life with, those in our neighborhoods, those in our communities. We're all in extremely unfamiliar territory. And in the midst of all of this, we're looking to discover what God is up to. Not that he's caused the earthquake in that direct sense, not that he's caused COVID, but in the midst of unfamiliarity, in the midst of confusion, in the midst of turmoil, in the midst of tragedy in some cases, what can we tease out of this in terms of creating a new horizon, a new sense of, what will a new future look like? It's not going to look like another version of the old. It's going to look like some kind of completely new situation. And that's the thrill of mission for me in this situation. Just simply that we don't have any roadmaps, and that's actually exciting. It's not necessarily a problem, but it's just reality. And I think one of the important things that as church leaders we have to say, there are no roadmaps.
There are no roadmaps. And what's interesting about that is that once upon a time, not very long ago, we thought there were roadmaps. And that's why some could say, we're now in exile because our roadmaps have been taken away from us. But we're now into multiple generations in which the stories of what people used to call Christendom and other things have gone and disappeared and don't make any sense anymore. The generation of my kids don't go, we've been taken away in exile. They go, we're in this new space of exile. And that's this new space that isn't about roadmaps. And that's why the earthquake metaphor makes so much more sense than I was watching the celebrations for the end of the Second World War over the weekend, in which, more in the UK, people who were 100 were standing up in their uniforms to remember what it was like when it all ended. Now, those people can say, a story's been taken away from us. But most of us watching this, it's not memory, it's something else. And that's why exile makes no sense in this new space.
Mm.